Open your Bibles to Revelation chapter 8. Verse 8. We already looked at verses 1 through 7. Now we're looking at the second angel that sounded in verse 8. I've been getting messages from people that have never heard this message before, because there's people that are signing up on YouTube to be subscribers, and then when a new message is placed on YouTube, they hear these newer messages first, not having all the background and teaching of all the Last Day series messages. And some think I'm just off the wall, and some really go, well, I never heard anything like this before. And they're interested, it piqued their interest, and now they're sticking around and listening to it, and they're trying to catch up on the website as fast as they can. It's a very interesting situation that we have developed here. And I hope many of you do not get discouraged when you see how many messages there are in the Last Day series. I think we're closing in on 500 messages. And some of those early messages, the first 100, are very lengthy messages, so it's going to take you probably around somewhere between 750 and 900 hours to catch up. And that's just in listening time. Now, I'm not saying this to discourage anyone. I'm just saying that's how much we have covered. I even challenged the people that listen to me for years, and some of them been through all of it, all of the teaching in the Last Day series. And then on occasion they ask me questions by emails, and all I could do is refer them back to, because I don't have the time to go back and reteach any of this stuff. We have so much still yet to cover. There's no time to go back. So that's what the archives are for. That's what the ebooks are for. That's what the paperbacks are for in the Last Day series. To give you the tools and sources that you're going to need to not only catch up, but separate yourself from what you think you already know concerning eschatology, prophecy, the study of the last days events, and what led up to it. So there's a lot of information, my friends. You new people, do not get discouraged. If all you can listen to is a message every few days or once a week, at least do that. Especially the first 40 to 50 messages. It lays a groundwork, a timeline down, that it's very important. Now, if you're reading it, the first 4 volumes is extremely important in the Last Day series. It gives you a foundation. One of my most favorite volumes in the paperback format is the 5th volume. Is what Abraham saw. So I encourage you. I'm not trying to say this to discourage you, but to encourage you. Stick with it. Take your time. Don't try to rush through it so you can catch up, because it's important you understand all the details that I have laid down through these many, many, many years of teaching on this subject. Now with that, let's read Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. Well, let's just go. I said I was not going to do it, but I'll just briefly do it. Let's go verse 6. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared them to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire. Those were judgments, mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And I gave that as the figurative language meaning of what was described in Acts 2:19 and 20. Go back and listen to it, which describes the crucifixion. So it's a figurative picture of the cross. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all the green grass was burnt up. And I gave you the explanations on that, which I'm not going to repeat tonight. Shortly after the cross, the church in the Middle East fell into false doctrine. It didn't take very long at all. And then we get to verse 8. And his second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain. By the way, if you haven't checked it out yet, and I'll keep it on the pastor's blog, and we'll update the date on it so it stays fresh on the pastor's blog, so you don't have to search too deep to find it. There's a good summary that someone did concerning the teachings so far in this part of the series of last days concerning the trumpets. So if you want a quick summary review, you can also go to the pastor's blog and check it out there. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Now, if you Google it, or if you have a library that is extensive as I do, because I made a mission to get everything I can on the subject, you're going to see some really strange explanations of what these verses mean. That's why I have said many times this Last Day series goes against the Christian science fiction doctrines that are out there concerning the last days prophecies. Because that's what they are, Christian science fiction. A lot of made-up prophecies. Out of nothing, really. Even the scriptures that they twist and take out of context, it's really bizarre if you really think about it, how much they fabricate out of something that's really not there, but they make it sound like it's there. Instead of just preaching the rightly divided word of God, they have come up with all kinds of, especially the last 50 years, of some silly Christian science fiction nonsense. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain. Go to the screen. Great. In Greek is megas. What does it mean? Well, there's different meanings, and once again, you have to keep everything in context when you're reading the scriptures, because a Greek word could have multiple meanings, but if you keep it in context, it will make sense. And you don't have to fabricate silly doctrines to prove your point. And the second angel sounded was a great. Great is megas in the Greek. What does that mean? Space plus dimensions. It also could mean mighty. So write that down. Great equals in the Greek megas. Megas in the Greek in context here in this verse is going to talk about space and dimensions, and also something with a lot of might, or is mighty. Now this could go either way, good or evil, as far as the might is. And then we get to the next word. And as it were a great mountain. When you study mountains, or mountain in the scriptures, both Old and New Testament, it's a symbol. In general, it's a symbol of a great nation. It's a symbol of a great nation. Now, let's continue reading. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire. Now, I'm going to relate this all to Islam. What came on the scene? $1,500 years ago or so, and it's been around ever since. And all the upheaval and havoc that it has created throughout the centuries. And as where a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. Fire. And y'all get there, since I'm saying this is all related to Muhammad and Islam, mostly Islam, and what it represents. Fire here, if you actually, I wouldn't recommend it unless you have to, like I did, is mentioned in many verses. Let's just see, mentioned in many verses in the Quran. And what does it symbolize in the Quran? As a symbol for punishing unbelievers. That is anyone that's not a Muslim or have converted into a Muslim. All right. Now, all this, like I said, is related to Islam. So, as it was a great, something that is explaining to us that has created space and dimension through might and has become mighty, which those of you who have been around through this teaching for the many years that I've taught on this knows how from Muhammad on up through the centuries how Islam spread in its dimensions east, west, north, and south from its beginnings. They're from originally Medina and then other places. Medina in Saudi Arabia. So Islam has become a great or megas or in space and dimension a mighty and powerful force. And mountain is just telling us that it's a symbol of a great nation. So a great nation came into existence that was mighty and spread its wings in space and dimension. And one of its purposes was, if you read the Quran and the Hadith and so forth, is to punish unbelievers that would not fall in line to its belief system. What started with Muhammad, and then obviously what he started was carried on by his disciples and followers all the way up to the present day. So, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire, this eventually great nation of people under the flagship of Islam spread its wings with force and might, punishing unbelievers along the way. And how you know it's unbelievers? How you know it's referring to people? Because, and as where a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. Let me read you something about sea. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain ablaze with fire, this is a different translation, was hurled into the sea. So a third of the sea became blood. Let's just stop right there. The great blazing mountain is hurled into the sea. Depending on how commentators interpret the mountain, the sea can mean many things. The sea can mean humanity if Satan is the mountain. The church, it can mean the church if heretics are the mountain. Well, I believe prior to even Islam, somewhere between verse 1 and 2, the church fell into false doctrine. That early church, the early Coptic church. Now everybody believes, because this is what you've been told and this is what they write about, that the Coptic church was born in Alexandria in Egypt by Mark. The Mark that Paul got frustrated with, but then wanted to see him toward the end of his ministry. And he was a great influence, but even after Mark, it didn't take very long for that church to go sideways. But that's not where the Coptic church started. It began in Jerusalem. It was not called necessarily the Coptic church, but that's the principles and what they taught started in Jerusalem. And fortunately, it didn't take very long that even whatever survived in Jerusalem didn't turn into a false doctrine also. But that's another subject. So you got humanity if Satan is the mountain. You got the church if heretics are the mountain. You got the people of the Roman Empire, which also can be identified as the mountain, which I don't believe has any application in this particular verse. You have the Gentiles if Israel is the mountain. You have the world's restless people, and that could be any of the nations that's described in the scriptures. And they got the waters of the sea. If there's a natural explanation for the mountain, such a meteorite or volcano, or if the mountain is nuclear warhead, which I don't believe it's any of that. It's probably best not to mix and match symbolic and literal interpretations when it comes to imagery in passages like this. Well, that's an understatement. A consistent view, either symbolic or literal, may be wrong, but a mixing of both views is almost certainly an error. Also, it's wise to try to understand symbolic language in the context of clear teaching in other scriptures. Before moving on, let's look at some of the ways Scripture deals with the sea. In the Old Testament, the predominant use of the Hebrew word yam, that's just Y-A-M, you don't have Y-A-M or yam, is to describe the Mediterranean Sea. The word yam also meant west, westward, or seaward with respect to Israel. The Mediterranean is called the Great Sea, the Western Sea and the Sea of Philistines in some translations. Other seas mentioned in the Old Testament are the Red Sea, or literally the Sea of Reeds, or the Dead Sea, literally the Sea of Salt, and the Sea of Galilee. The word yam also is used to describe broad rivers like the Nile and Euphrates, and it's used with reference to the great basin in the temple court. In the New Testament, the Greek word thalassa, T-H-A-L-A-S-S-A, describes many of the same bodies of water we encounter in the Old Testament. The Jews exercised a fear of the sea, probably because of the ancient Semitic beliefs that the deep personified the power that fought against God. Yet God is the creator of the sea. He controls it and commands it to provide for mankind's good. The language of Isaiah and Jeremiah demonstrated he is absolutely sovereign over the sea. Some of the greatest miracles in the Bible are set in the sea. The parting of the Red Sea, Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus calming of the same sea. Whatever fears people have of the sea will be done away with when God removes the sea in the world to come. Used symbolically in the Old Testament, the sea perhaps, and this is the part I want you to hear and take note of. Used symbolically in the Old Testament, the sea perhaps means the nations around the Mediterranean, or the tumultuous changes among the nations of the earth. It could also mean the sea and how it affects a nation or people. I think a better translation there in Revelation 8:8 is for sea is people or peoples. It could mean people that are troubled by the wicked. People troubled by the wicked. Let's write that down. People troubled by the wicked. People that are troubled by hostile armies. That's another way of looking at it. I'm just giving you the evil explanations of it, because it also could mean good, because like there's a wave of righteousness and stuff like that. But here, that's not what's happening. In Revelation 8:8, we're not talking about anything good that was going to happen to anyone or any nation. It could mean waves of devastating armies upon people or nations. So that's just a small explanation, or a brief is a better way of saying it, of what this is referring to. So far we have, it's got great far as might, and the area that it will cover through space and dimension. Of course, we're referring to Islam, the mountain, which symbolizes a great nation that would be established, that would bring not only fire but fear to the unbelievers, and also punishment. Remember, in Islam, if you didn't convert, they could possibly kill you in those days, or if you agreed to pay a certain amount of tax to them just to stay alive, basically, they would spare you, so they could be funded with all their ambitions of spreading the false doctrine of Islam. They were a people that were troubled by the wicked. That's what Revelation 8:8 is saying. But it goes on to say, and the second angel sounded, and there was a great mountain burning with fire, was cast into the sea. Of course, now sea are the people or the nations that would be troubled by Islam. But since we're referring to Israel here, I think that's what it's referring to first, and then it would spread from that point on. But it continues by saying, and the third part of the sea, this could mean the churches, it could mean the people that are believers, but a third of them, I believe churches, part of the sea became blood. Became blood. Now that, we don't have to go very far, and we've already covered a lot of this. You can see how it fits neatly into what Islam accomplished. And it came blood at first with false doctrines, then Islam, and then the shedding of blood through murder. Conquering of a nation, and then nations, and then the eliminating of Christians as far as their space and dimension spread its wings, bringing punishment and conversion to bow down to their false god, Allah. And the third part of the creatures were in the sea and had life. Died. The third part of the creatures of the sea had life. No, this is not some creatures in the lake. No, this is not some creatures in the river. No, this is not some creatures in the ocean. I don't even know how they would explain that away, to tell you the truth. And they tried to, but they come very short with their explanations. Just imagine you're having a lake and a third part of those creatures died. How did God do that? Now, God could do anything he wants, but think about it, how silly that is. Well, this section of the lake, the creatures are going to die, but there'll be life in the other sections of the lake, or let's just say the oceans, or the rivers. So this part of the river, everything's going to die. Even the Dead Sea salt, the Dead Sea, which are the salt sea, there's no life. Everything died. So how do they explain that away? They don't do a good job of it. Because what they're missing here, folks, is, and the third part of the creatures were in the sea and had life, died. How did they die? Well, once again, through false doctrine and then Islam conquering those areas, they died spiritually. Yeah, some were physical and spiritual. But even if they were spared physically, they died, a third of them, spiritually. And the third part of ships were destroyed. No, this is not talking about boats. This is not talking about cargo ships. This is not talking about any type of military ships. This is talking about the three branches of the church in that period of time. You had the Roman influence, you had the Byzantine influence, and the Coptic. The Coptic church was originally centered in Jerusalem. It didn't take long for it to become idolatrous. And then obviously, what happened with Islam in the conquering of Jerusalem and Israel and all the surrounding nations. What this is referring to, the third part of the ships, is referring to churches. Now let me read something else to you. Some quick explanations, very quick, because I'm not going to really get into it at this time. The ship has been a symbol of the church since the 1st century. Just Google, or whatever search engine you use, ships and churches. Art. How ships were identified as churches in art, in stained glass windows, and so forth. Up to recent times, most people had an awareness of that symbolism. The ship has been a symbol of the church since the 1st century. This is perhaps due to recurrence of stories involving ships in the Bible, from Noah narrative to the several New Testament stories of Jesus, the Sea of Galilee, the coming of the storm, etc. The ship, bark, B-A-R-K, or bark, B-A-R-Q-U-E, or barchetta, B-A-R-C-H-E-T-T-A, was an ancient Christian symbol. It's the church tossed on the sea of disbelief, worldliness, and persecution. Think about that. When you read, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. It won't take you very long to research how many churches were destroyed when Islam started to conquer. How many churches were destroyed physically, and how many lives were destroyed spiritually and physically. Ships here is referring to churches. Even in building designs, they knew this. For example, the area between the narthex, Narthex, and the sanctuary was called the nave, Nave. The word comes from the Latin navis, Navis, or ship, S-H-I-P, and was meant to portray the reality that the church is a ship, protecting those inside it from the waves and buffets of the world. Architecturally, many artists would make this analogy even more visible by constructing the ceiling over the nave in a vaulted fashion. Notre Dame in Paris is one example of that, exposing the wooden beams, which resembles the reversed look of a ship's keel. Furthermore, inside the nave can sometimes be found a pulpit that is made to look like a ship. Let me read this to you again. This word comes from the word navis, or ship, and was meant to portray the reality that the church is a ship. And the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, more importantly than physically, spiritually. And the third part of the ships, now right in there, churches, were destroyed. Were destroyed. As I said, those three branches that streamed out of the early days of the church, the Roman, the Byzantine, and the Coptic. There's a small remnant now, but the Coptic church was destroyed by Islam. The Coptic church began in Jerusalem, and then it became popular, let's just put it that way, I believe around 41 AD through John Mark and his followers. Some believe around 50 to 60 AD, but I think a little bit earlier than that. And it grew rapidly. Probably even more rapidly than what we saw in Asia Minor and Greece and Rome. But Islam didn't reach Greece and Rome in those early days. The first 500 to 600, 700 years after the church. It conquered and eliminated one after another the churches that were the Coptic churches. Now, the Coptic churches have turned into something totally different now than those original days, beginning days. And like I said, there's a small remnant now of them. But the thing is, nothing compared like it was shortly after John Mark expanded it into Egypt and then beyond. This is what he's referring to concerning the third part of the ships were destroyed. And then we move into the third part of the, we move into the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven. What can that possibly mean? If you're interested and you want to know, you're going to have to let me know that, because I can move on to other subjects. Now, I think you are. So why don't you use the 3 ways you can communicate to me and let me know. As we unravel this using common sense, not Christian science fiction, to decipher what the Word is saying here. That's what we do here. Now I want to hear from you. Play a song.